Hello, everybody. Welcome to what may be the 20th call of the Amazon Investor Coalition. Again, this is a weekly call that is recorded and will later be made available as a podcast series. This is an initiative of the Global Governance Philanthropy Network and Nexus, two organizations I created previously. And this is also a partnership platform of the UN 75 Global Governance Forum. Today, we are talking about, as we all talk about every week, advancing forest-friendly economic development across the Amazon region, but we're also talking about Amazon reforestation, everything that means. The invitation was quite an ambitious one, talking about not only halting deforestation, but reforesting the Amazon region with commercially viable opportunities. I want to tell a little bit about the pathway to get here. So Luis Fernando Laranja, who some of you may know from Caite Investimentos, it has one of the private equity success stories coming out of the Amazon. And he is at a place in his investing in development now where he is advocating for no longer just halting deforestation, but advancing reforestation so that we can bring ecological balance back to the region. Along the way, I also met Walter Vergara and Initiative 20 by 20 and learned about $2.5 billion in pledges coming to the Latin America region to help with reforestation and afforestation and ecosystem restoration. And then a couple of weeks ago, I spoke with Ethan Steinberg and his Propagate Ventures, which wants to make a bankable asset out of agroforestry. And also a couple of weeks ago, we had Justine from the Climate Bonds Initiative to talk about the growth of green bonds from a $50 billion industry 10 years ago to almost $1 trillion industry today. So we seem to have a perfect storm for reforesting the whole region. It can be profitable, it can be good for the environment. And I've asked around, no one that I've spoken to knows of a reforestation bond yet. So it seems like we may have an opportunity to design one. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a phone call with Thomas Lingard, who is the Chief Sustainability Director for Unilever. And we spoke about Unilever possibly putting out a bond to buy sustainable produce from the Amazon, maybe in the format of a corporate bond. And if that's the case, and we can secure a long-term purchase contract, that's enough to securitize a bond. So how can we do this? It's a very exciting moment, very exciting opportunity. And let's begin this journey by hearing Ethan give us a 5-minute sort of review of his wandering into the space of agroforestry and trying to make a bankable asset out of it. And then we'll transition to a couple more of those sharing. The majority of this phone call is going to be a crowdsourcing conversation. We're the people coming on deck to put this bond together. Ethan.
Thanks, Jonah. Appreciate it. It's nice to see some friendly faces and meet some new ones. So howdy, everyone. Ethan Steinberg, I'm the CEO at Propagate Ventures. We are an analytics and project development platform for agroforestry. In short, what that means is we make it easier for investors to fund low-risk agroforestry projects in the United States. Agroforestry being the integration of fruit, nut, and timber trees in a row with an existing agricultural operation. So maybe a different way to approach it is we think a lot about bringing the forest to the field. Now, my journey, how we sort of landed across all of it and why we started Propagate a couple of years ago was through food. So the health of food is thy medicine approach. I'm diabetic. One of my co-founders looked at food through healthcare and another looked at it for athletic reasons. Actually, he was an Olympic hopeful. And so good food meant we were either healthy or performing well. from an athletics perspective. And the question we landed on as a team was, why is it that the health of the food that we're demanding, there isn't an equivalent ask for the health of the landscapes where our food comes from? Now, regenerative agriculture kind of becoming a little bit more mainstream over that period of time. We sort of stepped back and looked at that landscape of how regenerative agriculture was developing, and essentially asked the question, why are trees not more commonly discussed as compared to things like cover cropping or rotational grazing? And simply to say, all different solutions for different ecosystems, and they all hold an important part globally in terms of where they fit in, so that we can develop a holistic solution set for climate change. Now, fast forward a little bit, we're operating in 9 states across the US with multiple agroforestry projects, about 23 projects that we work with. That, I was speaking with Jonah the other week and thinking a lot about the applicability of agroforestry, either silvopasture systems or alley cropping systems, for some of the direct challenges that are being faced in Brazil and elsewhere in that region of the world, and how some of our learnings in terms of what we look at on the economics front, costs, revenues, yield projections, labor assumptions, for the either establishment of or transition to an agroforestry system, how that might be made applicable to help develop a financial instrument that an institutional investor would feel very comfortable with. On one part, that's transparency in terms of the business and financial risks associated from an investment perspective, as well as ensuring that our farmers have, this is probably the more important part, ensuring that our farmers have the resources they need to confidently manage a system, to ensure that operations and maintenance are as successful as possible, so an investment meets the criteria that we are aiming for. I'll stop there. Happy to answer questions. I truly appreciate getting the opportunity to talk about agroforestry with y'all.
Ethan, give us a 1 minute on the technology that you've been building, the data gathering behind it.
Yeah, of course. And maybe, Jonah, there's an opportunity for me to show a little bit. I can share my screen and walk everyone through it as well, if that would be helpful. But in short, we're looking at using GIS technology. We're doing a series of economic analysis that looks at effectively what are the CapEx and OpEx requirements at the farm gate to deliver an agroforestry system. That has to be met with the holistic context of the farmer themselves. So this is basically their long-term goals, their management philosophy, how they approach the sort of labor force needs on their farm, as well as the geophysical climate, how much rain there is, things like that. Those components all come together and helps us identify the costs for establishment or transition, how that's going to affect cash flow, the labor needs, what the access to markets are for various crops. All that gets compiled and creates a really clear and compelling case for the investment requirements and the return.
Great. So a given landowner wants to take on agroforestry, wants a loan. The risks involved are, will he have access to market? Does he know what to plant? Can he hire the right people? The technology solution that provides help with all of those things will significantly reduce the risk, which is why we may be able to create a bankable asset, a financial product out of that. But how big is the demand in the region? How big is this current ecosystem of reforesters?
Sure.
Ethan, I'm going to go to Walter now.
Cool.
Hey, Walter, tell us in a quick nutshell, what is Initiative 20 by 20?
Oh, thank you, Jonah. Very interesting, Ethan, and we should have a one-on-one afterwards. This is a coalition of 23 impact investors investing in Latin America in agroforestry, silvopastures, straight reforestation, grassland restoration, and low carbon agriculture. There are 195 projects already ongoing. You can check a lot of this information in initiative 20x20.org. The 23 impact investors have different business models. Most of them are based in Europe, and there are a few in Latin America. I'm very proud to say that Caete Investimentos, Luis Fernando is one of the partners, and we are very, very proud of what they have been achieving. 20x20 is also working on scale-up investments. So we provide the resources required to move a successful business model has been tested on 10,000 hectares, try to ramp it up to 100,000 hectares, so 200,000 hectares. It's a heavy lifting, but it can be done. The initiative also has a political dialogue ongoing with the ministers in most countries, or provincial ministers in the case of Brazil. And we have we have been sponsoring a number of analytical studies. One that will be of interest to Ethan is the economic argument for land restoration, where we look at why should a private investor be interested in agroforestry or silvopastures, and what would the state, the nation, get out of it. And as I said, welcome to check additional details on initiative 20x20.org.
Great, thank you. Now I'd like to call on Jamie Cashman. Jamie works with the Development Finance Corporation, which is an evolutionary step beyond the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. It was created as a better process for helping the US government to do impact investing overseas. It used to be that we could only do lending. Now we can do equity. Jamie, can you tell us a little bit about the DFC? Are you there, Jamie? Oh, I think you might not be there. Okay, well, I'll tell you about the DFC. So the Development Finance Corporation works a lot in collaboration with USAID. They now have a policy that allows them to have a $60 billion exposure ceiling, which means that they can guarantee loans all over the world up to $60 billion. And I've started a conversation with them about possibly guaranteeing a loan for an Amazon reforestation bond. And the door is open for these conversations to start. And the changing winds in American politics will help that. Rumor has it that Joe Biden may actually be the next president. And that news has gotten a lot of investors from the United States and Brazil excited about the idea of designing new Amazon sustainability financial products. And the US government may be able to provide a loan guarantee of some of them, which again reduces risk and will invite many more financial partners to come to the table. Jamie, if you're there, feel free to add on. Okay, next I'd like to invite Mark to introduce himself. Mark Chassan of Transformative Capital. Mark has a fair amount of experience working on bonds. Say hi, Mark.
Hello, everyone. Really grateful to be here. Excited about what you put together, Jonah, and I really appreciate the invitation to collaborate with all of you in hopefully transforming the world with capital, which is what I'm about in my journey. And to nutshell it, I've been involved in law, finance, entrepreneurship. And what I found is that the two most influential impacts on humankind have been the environment in which we live, from which beliefs, behaviors, and culture arises. And once culture is adopted, then it perpetuates those beliefs and behaviors. So if we really want to look at one of the big leverage points, it's how do we change the environments in which we live so that we can form new beliefs and behaviors and culture. The second is entrepreneurship and innovation, largely brought to us through entrepreneurs and inventors. The inventions and the new businesses that have been created throughout history have changed the course of history and humankind's beliefs and behaviors again. So using those two acupuncture points, transformative capital utilizes capital, expertise in strategy, law, finance, and international entrepreneurship to really make big changes from from the micro to the macro rather than the macro to the micro. I sometimes feel when I look out at what is happening in our world and trying to make changes at the UN level or the political level, it seems like it moves at such a glacial pace and we just don't have that time. So how can we use money and capital and create those investment models? Because let's face it, money and love have been the big motivators throughout history. And yet money, unfortunately, has seemingly become the largest motivator now. So how can we make it attractive to do eco-social investments? And what we're seeing with ESG and the $30 trillion that has flown into it, largely is, while I applaud the efforts, lipstick on many of the same old pigs. And how can we really focus our efforts to be putting money into core regenerative projects that actually have substantial returns for investors so that we can attract that multiple trillions of dollars into what I would call core regenerative enterprises and projects, or REPs. Taking a page out of a company that I helped stand up, Clean Fund, which is one of the largest PACE finance or property assessed clean energy bond finance companies in the US. There was a criteria that was created that says that we can use tax assessments, for example, in order to support lower cost and more secure financing for energy efficiency and renewable energy as a public benefit. So taking that same model and developing a criteria for regenerative enterprises and projects that actually directly achieve the SDG goals, I believe that we can bring in financing for those projects with the guarantees of, say, the World Bank and DFC, and get those AAA rated bonds that provide the security and also provide potentially higher interest rates than general bonds, general corporate or municipal or government bonds. And so I believe that there is a compelling argument to be made for capital to start flowing into these regenerative enterprise and projects. And one of the core areas is how do we reforest and engage in agroforestry in order to provide the compelling returns. Also, in a world where interest rates are at an all-time low on bonds, we have to be careful that as interest rates increase, the bonds will actually become devalued. So how can we look at bond structures that have floating interest rates and or use the diversity of equity and other such things as royalties and product sales? So I really feel like one of the things to explore is an innovative, diversified bond that utilizes the guarantees of various governments and IGOs, so that actually more money will flow into bonds, and those bonds can have a higher interest rate to investors while lowering the interest rate to transitioning and developing countries.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. As I steward a network of investors into this territory of designing new financial products, I look for advisors with experience who can tell me what a bond indenture is and what to include and not include. And Mark has been one of those recent voices I found along the way who has the experience. But we also need the experience on the ground. who are the commercially viable companies that are already doing reforestation projects. Hey, I see that we have Erica and Daniel from Beraca on the phone. Can you guys introduce us to Beraca for a moment and tell us a little bit about your reforestation experience?
Sure. Thank you, Jonah. Good to be here. Me and Erica, we work for a company named Beraca. I see some familiar faces here. It's good to be here and see you all. We are based in Brazil, and we use agroforestry systems, usually with a diverse, different kinds of groups here in Brazil. Mostly in the Amazon rainforest, where people live in deforested areas. And so the agroforestry system is a very interesting model that we have used in many different projects. And one of the key factors of that model is related to the guarantee of demand for the products that will be used to reestablish a healthy system in a consortium of different species, so that the producer can benefit from the diversity of income, of additional income coming from the reforestation methodology since the beginning. So the consortium is very technical in a way that you need to better define what the species that will interact with each other since the beginning of the reforestation process, until you get into a moment in the project where you have more closed and primarily forest species in a more mature way, in a more mature moment. So we have used that successfully in projects mostly related to customers that are willing to invest on this kind of projects, mostly for groups that have interaction with family agriculture, not only with what we call wild harvesting. So they use both wild resources from nature, as well as shorter terms agriculture. Erica, if you'd like to add something.
Hi, everybody. I'm not going to add, Danielle. You explained very detailed, and I had already introduced myself to people I know. So just want to say hi again.
Great, thanks for that. I've also invited a couple of other people to join the call who were not announced in the email invitation previously. They also play a key role. Hey, Keith, could you tell us a little bit about Producers Market? You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry about that. Hey, everyone. Thank you, Jonah, and really amazing call. Love the topics here. In short, we have a market linkage platform where we're connecting agricultural producers to markets and working with the data and content to have it travel across value chains to consumers. Specifically to the Amazon, we were engaged with the representative of the Suriname President's Office, who's stayed on the new administration, and looking at a large piece of land that a local operator wants to develop into agroforestry systems. So we're using this as an opportunity and working with the Subnational Climate Fund, which is has been empowered by the Green Climate Fund now, to look at an innovative model of scalable food production for the Caribbean region based upon forestry crops and sustainability. So we're really focused on the market connectivity side and bringing in buyers to help give greater confidence to funding and financing of these types of sustainable procurement and sustainable forestry initiatives. So thanks for having me, and excited to keep learning here.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us, Keith. And Amanda, could you tell us a little bit about Regenerosity and the Buckminster Fuller Institute?
Yeah, happy to. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda Joy, Executive Director at Buckminster Fuller Institute. We ran a challenge program for a decade, identifying regenerative projects around the world, and have recently partnered up with Lush Cosmetics and the UNDP Equator Prize, two other kind of regenerative prizes, to create a larger pool of over 700 projects around the world that we're helping resource. And focusing first on regenerative agriculture, primarily in India, East Africa, and the Amazon. Thanks to the investors and philanthropists who have come to the table. And yeah, the idea is to fund these projects, but also be part of the larger decolonizing wealth movement of breaking down the power dynamic that often exists between projects and funders, and really recognizing that everyone is a wealth holder, just of different forms of capital. And yeah, another piece of it is bringing kind of that wealth of regenerative intelligence from the projects through different philanthropic networks. We have a team of philanthropists and funders that we work with, and yeah, trying to kind of like bring the regenerative principles throughout the whole community so that we can all achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and beyond in the most regenerative way possible. And we have an event on Thursday we'd love to have you all at, which is around monitoring and evaluation and verification for regenerative projects in a way that kind of stacks as many functions as possible. So we'll have Open Team and Regen Network and some others there. I'll put the link in the chat. Great to be here.
Great, thanks, Amanda. I was pasting lots of links into the waiting room that had nobody in it, and I only just realized that, and I have repasted everything to the main chat room, which is why you guys got all of those big dump of links all at the same time. So guys, we've got a network. We've got an active group of people invested. We've got entrepreneurs, we've got government regulators, we've got financial experts. We've got access to people who want to securitize loans. We've got access to people who are interested in offering long-term purchase contracts to securitize loans and bonds and things like that. So the next question is, okay, well, what we can do together? Who's going to take leadership? What are the unmet needs? What are the unanswered questions? And so I posted a bunch of questions which we can now talk about as a group. I just want to note, is there a chance that someone from the Climate Bonds Initiative is on that I haven't seen yet? Okay, they've been presenting on a couple of calls, and there was some indication they may join this one. So, okay, so before I get into this question, like who are the target investors and who is the bond issuer, does anybody have broad questions about this proposal suggested so far? Any questions for any of the previous folks who've introduced themselves? A teacher of mine once said that if you present something to a group and ask for questions and no one asks any questions, it means no one understood anything. So feel free to ask a question, and if there are none, I'll move on, but I'll recognize that there's something missing in my presentation.
I do have a question. Hello, everyone. Here is Margarita Mora from Miatero. I thank you very much to everyone for the presentations and for sharing with us the plans. I did have a question for Keith and his work, the work that producers market are like doing in Suriname. I was really triggered, not triggered in the bad way, but I was really curious, that's the right word, about Suriname per se, because I know that it is challenging that markets work differently. So I was curious on how you were thinking about this kind of approach in a country like Suriname. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it all starts with the local operators and their connectivity to the communities within those regions. And we're looking at 10 to 15 target crops that can reach commercial export levels. And given the lack of logistics at times, we're looking at how we can add value to crops to put them into a non-perishable format. So looking at 10 to 15 crops that the local operator would be growing, and based upon those crops, what would the yields be to reach market, and what would be the processing requirements to put them into a commercial format to reach the potential off-takers. And so we're collecting a lot of information around both the growing practices, the yields and offtake, both from this project as well as others in the community that have access to raw materials but don't have a market per se, and then understanding what the processing needs and requirements are to reach that commercial scale and the certification requirements, while building in the market partnerships from the ground up, as well as the financial and government support in order to fund and facilitate. And it's seen as a climate change mitigation project as well as a climate change adaptation project, due to the shift of looking at these open fields that maybe border the Amazon that have been already deforested from decades ago or more recently, and how these can be put back into production as a biomimicry of sorts of like a cultivated landscape for forestry that uses no-till and regenerative practices. So and hopefully I'm not boring you guys, but to take a step further, looking at how do you have cash flows in the first 12 months through root crops while the first tier of canopy grows and the first harvest come from tree crops. This model is going to be built a lot around fruit trees, coconut, nut crops, and timber crops. And the first year crops, such as inchi, ginger, turmeric, and other, shorter term cash crops. So hopefully that gives a little bit of a window into what we're looking at. And it's going to require a lot of operational planning and making sure that the yields are large enough to get to commercial scale, and that the processing facility is diversified and able to handle these types of outputs to reach market efficiently.
Great. So I can dive into a group of questions. I think I should let in a couple others. Other questions that people might have. Go ahead, John Bruno.
Thanks, Jonah. I just want to ask, Amanda mentioned about equitable finance. And of course, we know that on this call, a lot of what goes on will be invisible to the people on the ground. And I'm interested to see, we're just an NGO and not in any of those groups you mentioned, but I spent a long time on Wall Street and I understand a lot of what you're talking about. This is truly revolutionary. And if done right, will be amazing. We were involved in, I was asked for my opinion when Portugal was developing its green visa program, and I can see the possibilities here. But what I'm asking is, since a lot of this will be done invisibly to the communities, to the communities on the ground who will be affected, how can we ensure, this is a big question, but I think it's important, how can we ensure that not the upstream large corporate partners that I keep hearing being mentioned in all of this, but how will the communities directly benefit from, how will we ensure, I should say, that the communities directly benefit from these initiatives?
That's a good question. I'd love other people to respond to that who have local agroforestry experience. I'll just share one thing. I did some research to figure out how much money per acre Amazon farmland is worth. And I found this one extraordinary article, which I am amazed I had not yet seen. It gives a couple of numbers, but it makes a very important point that is more than that. Here's the article. Theconversation.com is a media site where scientists produce articles. Very interesting. So by their calculations, in Eastern Para, a cattle rancher can earn $250 per year per acre, whereas a soy farmer can get about $1,000 a year per acre. And if you're producing rice and beans and manioc, you can go up to $1,700 per acre. Yet, most of the agriculture in the region is cattle, even though it's not the most profitable. The article goes on to say that money isn't the stumbling block to sustainability in the region and halting deforestation. It says that tradition and culture and relationships and people's search for happiness, which is less about money and more about relationships with other people, they say that it is the stumbling block um, to changing the winds in the region, so to speak, to be more sustainable. So getting at your question, how can we ensure local people are included, or what is the impact going to be to local people? I'm learning in this journey that you're right. It's not about economics. It's about local dynamics. All politics is local, as they say in the United States. Would other people like to respond to John's question?
Yes, Jonah, I think it's a very good pertinent question. Part of the answer is that there is a subset of investors that have those considerations in mind when investments are made. And that's, they are called impact investors. And that's why it's very important when you assemble an alliance of investment in restoration, in agroforestry, in silvopastures, to count with the right partners. If you look at my screen here, these are the criteria for 1, 2, 3. It's an impact investor based in Frankfurt, in Germany. And you see there the commitments before they made a disbursement: 100% social insurance and access to healthcare, education and training, no gap between salaries for women and men, recycling water, and so forth, so forth. So just to indicate that the key to this, and I agree with your comment, the key is to have the right people, the right partners, investment partners associated to any platform. Of course, you will always find a lot of money. Money is not the problem, like Jonah said, but the right money to reach the social and environmental impacts as well as financial is a determining criteria.
Would anyone else like to reply?
Right.
Feel free to. Okay, let's go ahead and hear from Erica and then Mark. Okay. Or whoever was speaking before.
May I?
Yes, please.
I just wanted to highlight also that when we talk about, in Brazil, we talk a lot about the traditionality on plantations and some kinds of cultivation. So I believe this is, I didn't read the material that you sent, but I believe this is very connected too, because most of the things that we have is based on family agriculture, but most of the products that are the commodities that actually make our GDP grow is very connected to just a few companies. And what we do in terms of the agroforestry or restoration cultivation is to have different species so they can have like a calendar. So during the entire year, they have different species to work and different species to sell. So it creates an environment of entrepreneurship for these people to take care of their land. And it's very complex for them. So we are always looking for other partners to join us in terms of having other activities, not only purchasing the seeds that Beraca does. And also for us, in case of Beraca purchasing raw material, because from this community, we know that we are just complementing or just adding one part of their income through the seeds, but it's very, very important for them to be able to manage many species in the same area. So the entrepreneurship here is very, very important as well.
Great. Let's hear from Mark and then Christina, if you'd like to speak about the document you posted.
So there's an old saying in farming, maybe not that old, but it's don't grow basil, grow pesto. And so one of the things that Keith mentioned is, how do you stabilize and process products into value-added products so that the farmers are not selling crops. However, many of the farmers in developing countries don't have the resources to which crops go the best, which crops are going to yield the best cash. There's no sense of sharing of equipment or co-ops. And so one of the things that I think is a huge entrepreneurial and or NGO opportunity is to really build cooperatives of local farmers that have then access to data, to equipment, and to a collective bargaining arrangement where they can get higher cash values. The other thing is then to look at vertical integration of everything in the supply chain so that more products move directly from the farm to the consumer rather than through multiple middlemen using fossil fuel logistics and everything else. And how can we also then, being that this is the topic of how do we maintain forests and prevent them from being deforested for largely agriculture and ranching, using regenerative agriculture and training local farmers in regenerative agriculture where they're able to plant more trees to engage in that permaculture mix of agroforestry and various crops that not only yield cash, but also build soil. More than anything, what we have to do is build healthy soil so that the roots of plants then take carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back in the soil where it belongs. And all of this, if done right, can be highly profitable. In fact, a company that's a client of mine, Black Sheep, has about 200 acres in Costa Rica, and they're vertically integrated agroforestry and superfood company. They have their own brand called Rewild, but then Black Sheep as an entity also helps to create farms and to share ownership of farms with the farmers while creating a greater vertically integrated supply chain, as well as take many of the products off the farm and stabilize them through a centralized processing facility so that the farms can, in fact, generate much more income and a much greater slice of the supply chain pie. And so I think those are many of the ways where entrepreneurs and investors can, in fact, provide for much greater adoption of agroforestry as well as investment into agroforestry.
Christina, thank you, Mark.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I just wanted to draw your attention to this paper that was published a couple of months ago here at it was presented at the Wilson Center in DC, but so it's headed up by Andrew Waldron, who's a professor at Cambridge University. And the paper was written by over 100 researchers. It's super interesting because it, breaks down a lot of these sort of ideas that the expansion of conservation area to 30% of the Earth's surface by 2030 might have a negative impact on the economy of the countries that are protecting these areas and so forth. And so this paper presents the exact opposite. And so they analyze the global economic implications of this 30% protected area target. And it looks, very different. It's actually positive. And for indigenous people in particular, it's very attractive. Sadly, I've spoken to Andrew Waldron because I was wondering whether they had a Spanish version of this, because I think that just getting this paper out in Latin America would be super interesting. And of course, they don't have funding to translate the paper into Spanish. So if there are any investors out there who would be interested in translating this paper, I'm sure Andrew Waldron would be very, very happy to entertain that idea. Honestly, I've been pushing this all over Venezuela, Colombia, but it's in English. So anyway, I just thought that it might be relevant to some of you out there.
Great. There are a couple of more links and statements in the chat area. I encourage people to look at those. We're going to leave the chat room open so that people can go into it. I'm just going to include a couple more. One is this landmark report by the Climate Bonds Initiative about the $163 billion opportunity to help Brazil transition to sustainable agriculture. And then this is a list put out by the Food and Agricultural Organization under the UN framework about commercially viable Amazon species. There are a lot of them. This can help those agroforestry entrepreneurs move forward. So as we get into the future of this group that's on this call, it's seldom that a call like this will have a major policy impact. The best things that happen when people learn some new resources, take new ideas back to the table, build some original relationships, creating a network, a team collaborating towards a shared goal. That is a good outcome for a call like this. So I'm going to begin posting a couple questions about building the network to answer some of these unanswered questions. But first, I'm going to give the floor to Alex Rose from GIZ.
Yes, hi Jonah. This is Alex from GIZ. I just wanted to mention one thing to everybody. GIZ and partner, the Nature Conservancy in Mondelez, is investing in the southeast of Pará, in São Félix do Xingu and Tucumã, in agroforestry projects based on cacao and some other species. But maybe we should go a little bit deeper into this. In this discussion today, I've heard many people talk about agroforestry. Just to give you an idea, at least in Brazil, agroforestry is mainly done by family farming, and family farming, according to the rules and guidelines in Brazil, means it's just a family and basically one more assistant. So the capacity of the farms is they can basically only handle 1 or 2 hectares. So the little farms or the family farms have like 50 or 80 hectares, but it's 1 or 2 hectares only on which agroforestry is done. The other hectares are basically regular cultivation or cattle ranching. And the second issue or the challenge is the local market for the additional crops. Like if it's cocoa, it's fine, there's a stable market, but the additional products, there's still a big challenge to sell them. And I think Mark talked about the Costa Rica project. I just wanted to remind you that, for example, in the Brazilian Amazon, it's more expensive to bring the product from the Amazon to Sao Paulo than a product from Costa Rica to Miami or to the US. So there's still high logistical costs. So agroforestry is maybe a part of a solution, but cannot really be the entire solution for reforestation of degraded areas. So maybe not all can be seen with an investor's loop on in terms of return on investment or bond. So maybe a mixed finance is a feasible solution, like using the Amazon fund or other mechanisms mixed with some impact investor funding, because it's very hard for these family farmers or regular farmers to attend to the criteria, to comply with the criteria of an investment impact investor or some other kind of investors. That's just some food for thought and some problems we are facing by investing into agroforestry in Pará. Thanks.
So Alex, I have a follow-up question for you. There are literally dozens of non-timber forest products that can be produced, some of which have more demand than others, and others for which demand can be manufactured with lots of extra marketing and things like that. Something that the commercial markets can help get behind. I understand that transport is an issue, refrigeration during transport, technology is an issue. Of those dozens of others, potentially commercially viable products, besides cocoa, which are the most, which have the highest opportunity market-wise? Do you have an appreciation?
I cannot really answer that. It depends really on the region. If there's a city nearby, if the farmer is selling product to national procurement, like school feeding programs. It's usually the short circuit crops that help him survive, like banana and manioc. But usually when you talk about agroforestry, I believe there are people in this call who understand more than me from agroforestry, but you have to go through the Death Valley. And then first of all, you have to learn as a farmer how to build your agroforestry system. For this, you need technical assistance, which is very rare or expensive, or like an international project has to pay for it because the farmers cannot allow it. So first you have to set up your system, then you have to go through the Death Valley, which is usually 3, 4, or 5 years before you get some kind of return. So the best solution I've seen is investing in these short circles like bananas, manioc, something you can sell on a local fair. Just for cash.
Do any of those who have Amazon-based reforestation experience want to add some more in response to that question?
I totally agree with Alexander, and because for us it's similar, so we understand that we cannot simply say a few species that are the most interesting, because it really depends on the region and on the challenges, and obviously on the tradition of that group. You know, if they know the species, we cannot simply introduce something that it's not on their day-to-day to work with. And also, one of the things that we need to be careful, just adding again with what he said, is just that restorations cannot be, restoration with agroforestry cannot be the only answer, because in the long run, we will be stimulating 10, 15 species only, instead of stimulating the biodiversity, you know. So this is something that we need to understand the situation, the territory, and work with what the territory already has its proper its proper characteristics. You know, we need to work with that.
During the preparation process for this call, I learned that some genetic work was done on soy to make soy temperature resistant and therefore viable to grow in the Amazon region. And now it dominates the region. It's the crop that's producing $1,000 an acre. It seems to me that work can be done on market development and many other things, transport, to help agroforestry products become more commercially viable and therefore scalable. Even if it is just 15 species, if you have 15 species in a polyculture, that restores biodiversity in a very significant way that soy monocultures do not permit. So what is the frontier here? It seems to me that there must be an opportunity to scale agroforestry to compete with cattle and soy, to have greater appeal than just smallholder farmers. What are the stumbling blocks? What are the research hurdles that need to be overcome, or the access to market hurdles that need to be overcome?
I would just like to add to Erica's comments, and Alex, I agree that it's a complex system and it has to be turnkey to each region and occasion, let's say. But I think that it's important that that we consider also the demand of the energy markets. So, for instance, we have a specific legislation regarding biodiesel. So for most biodiesel producers in Brazil to sell to the energy agency the fuel that will go into buses and other transportation, they need to guarantee that part of that oil that is being transformed into biodiesel is coming from family agriculture. So these kind of initiatives, I think they help, and I think we should also think about the advocacy of the responsibility of advocacy into the different governments to also to rely on and to increase the need of these large volumes products coming from family agriculture and wild harvesting. There is a jet fuel project going on as well globally to increase the use of biojet fuel, let's say. That's a global initiative related to transportation, so concerning very high volumes of product, and there is no offer of products or projects related to that. So if we consider that we have extremely large areas that needs to be reforested, and we have the demand for products that would come from these areas, I think it's just a matter of doing the connections and talking to the right people and making that scalable.
Great. We only have a couple minutes left. Feel free to share.
Yeah, yeah, Jonah, I was gonna just briefly add in to one of the great obstacles is that there's so many crops that are just not well known to markets, that the large commercializers who reach consumers have narrowed and narrowed the scope of what's marketable, yet there's so many crops coming that can be grown in the Amazon or come out of the Amazon that ought to have a major market. And in the superfood space, in the meat replacement vegan space, and so there's crops like that can also be grown around tropical areas around the world, and some examples like peach palm or pixby and garlic vine and chaya and katuk, and of course heart of palm. These are crops that most consumers in the US have never heard of, but it takes a huge effort to bring them to market, to bring awareness. So I think there could be also an effort around taking crops that either exist in the Amazon or could be grown there and commercialized and building market for it. In addition to what was mentioned around, yucca and plantain and bananas, but going into these specialty ones that have a very high value.
Great. So we're at the top of the hour. This is the moment where most of the people will get off the call, and you're welcome to. Thank you to all of our speakers for joining us. But I also call this the water cooler moment because this is where we move into unstructured conversation. Some connections can be made and lots of other good things like that. Encourage people to share their LinkedIn IDs, their email addresses, their websites in the chat area. I'm going to offer a concluding sentence about my own learning process. So it certainly seems like a dream that there could be a solution to scale across the Amazon region. And maybe there is, but there's a lot of complexity and a lot of learning and a lot of innovation that needs to happen to make it possible. And some of the presenters on this call have some of those. Ethan and Propagate Ventures, designing technology and your financial product for the American market. Maybe there is some applicability for Brazil and other Amazon regions. I'm in the process of learning a great deal. I'm sharing it transparently with all of you in the process, which is a little bit of a vulnerable thing to do, but I think that's why this works. We all learn together. And I also learned that I have a lot more to read, but it seems as though I'm surrounded by the people with the answers. So thank you all for joining this call. It's extraordinary. I can't believe you all came. And now is water cooler time. This is where you guys can shamelessly self-promote events or introduce yourselves or ask pending questions or leave. Say bye if you leave.
I'd like to maybe ask Mark or someone else who is dealing with large numbers and large investments in the sense that what are the preconditions for being willing to invest? Do investors do they have to own the property? What are the tenure preconditions? Is it at all imaginable that the 25% of the Brazilian Amazon that is indigenous territories
would be of interest to investors, or is it totally irrelevant for that type of approach?
Well, I would say that if we look at the roughly $30 trillion that is currently invested as assets under management for ESG, when you look at the Apple Green Bond that paid, basically was a zero coupon bond paying 0.3% yield, you know, there is a definite demand for green bonds and for investments that are going to help, you know, the climate change issues, are going to help the environment, are going to help developing countries to become more economically sustainable and empowered. So we are seeing a lot of money going into that. One of the problems I've seen in the social impact space is it's almost like martyrdom of, oh, I invest for long periods of time at high risk and get low returns. Aren't I great? And unfortunately, most of the money flowing into social impact in the past has been very small amounts. You know, I've seen billionaires make $5,000 investments, and everybody's like, oh, that's so cool. So how do we get that billionaire to put in 100 million into investments? And largely it comes down to risk reward. Are we finding investments that actually meet the criteria of various investors? So if we're looking at long-term bonds with countries or governments, corporations that have fairly bad credit ratings, they're going to have to pay more for their capital. So if we were to take criterias that actually defined agroforestry, regenerative investments, clean energy, clean water, water recycling, biomimetic materials, waste upcycling as a few examples as those criteria, and we were able to get the guarantees that enhance credit, we could actually lower cost of capital to get more of these projects off the ground, to get more money flowing into the pockets of entrepreneurs. So largely it's how do we adjust risk, one, and how do we look at returns rather than just economic returns, but also regenerative or environmental or social returns, and actually find an objective way to measure that and add that onto the economic returns as a number, so that these investments become more compelling, and those large companies around the globe that have made some commitment to SDGs and sustainability can actually, in some objective way, validate their investments into these types of enterprises and projects, so that we actually can see widespread adoption. And I think that's been the problem, is orchestrating things that will efficiently match capital and what they're looking for with projects. And so that's one of the areas that I'm working on diligently, is to create a matching platform that utilizes algorithmic filtering and AI to effectively match capital. There's also a lot of areas that quite frankly, people aren't considering. How do you do inventory or receivables financing? How can we get royalties as a top line gross licensing fee and distribution, potentially, so that investors don't have to wait a long time for that risky occurrence of an IPO or an M&A that may never happen? How do we look at bonds and create floating interest bonds in a low interest market, so that bond investors will invest in bonds knowing that they're not going to lose their shirt as interest rates climb? So there's lots of ways of sewing together multi-stakeholder engagement between IGOs, NGOs, private-public partnerships in ways that make the bonds and equity investments compelling.
Hey, everybody. Oh, what do you know? I even unmuted myself. So Mark, agree. My name is Ian Fisk. I'm with the Mentor Capital Network. Jonah has invited me into this. We work with startup social entrepreneurs all over the globe, including a number who are working in places where outside investors are never going to buy the land, because the folks who own it have had really, really bad experiences with folks who look like me coming in and offering to buy their land in a contract that they no longer like, which is why I'm a huge fan of royalties or any sort of payment out of cash flow. But how do you guarantee this? The earlier part of your conversation, you were talking about how do we put numbers on all this? That's the holy grail of impact investing. How do you make people actually think for the long term, despite what everybody says? They don't actually do it. And political stability is, in my experience, unfortunately, a big answer to that, which has not been true in either the US or Brazil recently. And if there were laws saying we will, companies that do X and provide for the environment will gain these benefits because we recognize the societal benefits, that's great. But there are a few countries where those laws come into play, but not too many. And I would love to hear, I know a little bit about a lot of things, so I'm not deep into the Amazon, but I'm into the impact investing space globally. If anyone has any sense of where in the Amazon region there are stable political entities that are offering benefits to companies where the government is thinking in the long term that investors could be tempted into, I would love to know about that. We've done some interesting work in Mexico, but I don't know Latin America at all, or rather to the depth of the people on this call anyways.
Across many industries, it depends on the industry. Across many industries, there is political stability in Brazil. There are products coming out of the Amazon and successful companies that win the favor of the political right and the political left, and that provide a return on investment. Some of them might only be small scale. Some of it is large scale, so that the answer changes depending on the question of scale.
Also, there's ways that you can bring private capital to a country. Generally, if you go to a country, especially a developing country, with your hand out and say, I've got a great idea, why don't you fund me? They're going to say, yeah, get in the back of that mile-long line. However, if you say, I can bring capital, I can lower the cost of capital to you if you issue a bond. And if we can get AAA or AA rated bonds, and then, for example, let's say that I have a regenerative community development project that I want to do in the Amazon region that will focus on regenerative agriculture and agroforestry, and it's a $50 million project. And let's say that Brazil needs a waste to energy treatment plant for $100 million. I can go to my investors and say, we're raising $100 million for a $50 million project. And everybody goes, well, why? Well, because it's a World Bank guaranteed AAA rated bond. At the end of 10 years, your principal will be guaranteed. Now I take that bond at say 6.5% interest, whereas Brazil might be paying 13% interest for that bond. I go to Brazil and I say to the government, you're going to make sure that there's no corruption involved in this. You're going to give me fast tracking of all the permits I need. You're going to give me tax credits for the investment. You're going to give me employment training credits. You're going to waive repatriation fees. You're going to waive import and export tariffs. And they would say, most likely, yes. And you're going to get incremental tax revenues. You're going to get all these wonderful things. Now, what happens is their waste to energy treatment plant can be funded by incremental tax credits, by tipping fees, by energy fees, whatever, there's actually revenues flowing to fund the bond and to pay that bond. So the World Bank feels pretty good that the country is going to meet its obligations. From a standpoint of what I do with that $100 million bond, now I take it to a bank, put it in a lockbox account at 3.5%, 4%, and it's paid off and completely liquidated with amortized payments in 10 years. So now I have my $50 million to do the regenerative community development project. We got a $100 million waste to energy treatment plant. So for that $100 million, we actually got $150 million worth of regenerative projects. My project's much more safe as a result of that, because I'm actually working with the government and they're giving me protection, because I brought in $100 million at half of what it would cost them normally to get that $100 million for their plant. So those are the kinds of financial structures that I believe we can put in place that will make a lot of sense to investors on the one hand, and on the other hand, will really help local economies to grow and to get their needs met.
Great. This conversation can continue to mature. I just want to open it up for some others. Go ahead.
Jonah, can I jump in?
Sure.
Just listening to all this bond talk, we're working a lot on tokenization, and we have a tokenization platform, but it'd be really interesting to see if there's a way that we could tokenize the bond. One of the new things that's starting to happen, because there's a municipal crisis brewing in the United States, well, probably actually all the way around the world, but because of the pandemic, a lot of state and local governments are on their way to going broke, or they're having huge tax volatility for their income. And so there's a big, very quiet behind the scenes thing happening now where they're looking at how to change and adapt like bond issuance structures and the ways that new technologies, blockchain and tokenization can be used to issue new types of bonds. And so, this conversation has got me thinking. It's very interesting learning about, especially Mark, what you were just talking about whether or not we could potentially issue a digital bond, parallel to the traditional markets, because the cost of issuing a bond in the regular financial markets is very large, and that's one of the major obstacles to doing this. But the ability for us to issue like an Amazon bond or some other kind of, funding bond through the blockchain that is more of a grassroots concept might be a solution that you guys want to think about. It has its own regulatory hurdles and its own web of challenges, but net, it might be like a nice parallel or an introductory way of being able to get this kind of Amazon bond out into the market at a lower cost. So just some food for thought.
Nice. So I think that the destination of this conversation is going to be a lot of smaller conversations. I think that there's a lot of opportunity here. I think that tying the bond issuance to some sort of a blockchain strategy holds a lot of promise. Maybe we'll pursue both ideas simultaneously. It seems to me that there are a couple of just moving forward pending questions. Alex suggested that Alex from GIZ suggested that the big stumbling block is infrastructure, transport of viable produce outside the Amazon. And another stumbling block that others talked about is those products that are not soy and cattle meeting demand outside the Amazon. Both of those seem solvable to me. And I'm going to try to source answers to them. My guess is that solutions already exist and Alex or others simply don't know about them yet. I think most people on this call are involved in the private LinkedIn chat room. So as I move forward and learn on some of this, I'll post some of my questions there, and we will probably dedicate future calls of the Amazon Investor Coalition to this continuing conversation.
Could you put that link into the chat? I'm not in that LinkedIn group.
Oh yeah, sure.
And Stan, I'm happy to talk to you about the crypto preservation of forests as well as agroforestry. I'm sending you a note as well.
Yeah, great. We actually have a token that we launched last year, which Jonah knows about, called Ultra Reserve, where we've been basically doing tokenized assets around forest reserves. We have a project in Ghana and we're doing some stuff in the Amazon. Very small scale right now, but happy to talk to you about it and see where there might be opportunities to help out.
Yeah, I mean, we could even create a stable coin that's value is tied to growing timber, and that at some point in time will be harvested sustainably, and thereby you have stability and also guaranteed growth in the coin itself.
Yeah, we've looked at that. You know, we run Ven, which was the first digital currency, and it's like a diversified stablecoin with carbon as part of the backing. We've looked at timber. You know, for me, like I tend to be a bit of a dreamer purist in the sense that I would love to see rewilding of these locations because the impact on biodiversity is so large. And you know, when you're harvesting the timber, and depending on how it's being done, you know, it could either be part of the problem or part of the solution. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, like, I think a number of different financial mechanisms that could be done, and they could all kind of interact with each other and even trade against each other. I mean, I tend to really advocate for the idea of, like, you know, ocean preservation zones that could be funded through a token, reforestation that could be funded through a token for rewilding. And I think that there's enough demand in the market for those sorts of things where people could, you know, you could price in the benefits. But theoretically, you could even like price in like oxygen generation, like, you know, the fact that the trees in a forest perform an oxygen function, and put a value on that, and see if you could, you know, start to put that into the market, somewhat theoretically. But clearly, like, you know, an asset-backed stablecoin for forestry that's harvested, that's going to have long-term benefits for the buyers.
Nice. Okay, we'll continue to pass this information along. I encourage everyone to share your emails and your LinkedIn's and your websites below. And unless there are any other questions, maybe we can wrap. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jonah, for putting this together. Much appreciated.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Jonah.
You bet, Stan.
Jonah, thank you so much. This has been great. Appreciate it.
Likewise. I'm going to stop recording in case Vasco, you understand. Mark, thank you so much. If you want to stay on, you're welcome.